I knocked twice on the glass door of Victoria's corner office, my quarterly review folder tucked under my arm. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind her desk, the city sprawled out 30 floors below, but I was focused on the woman who commanded this space with an elegance that seemed effortless. "Come in, Daniel." Her voice carried that authoritative warmth that made everyone in the firm respect her. Victoria Chen had built her reputation on being brilliant, fair, and absolutely uncompromising when it came to excellence. I settled into the chair across from her mahogany desk, watching as she reviewed my performance metrics on her tablet. At 35, she was the youngest senior partner in the firm's history, and today she wore a charcoal gray blazer that perfectly complemented her sleek black hair, which was pulled back in her signature low bun. "Your analytical work on the Morrison account was exceptional," she began, looking up with those dark eyes that seemed to see everything. "The way you restructured their supply chain model, it reminded me of something a partner with 15 years of experience would produce." "Thank you," I said, genuinely surprised by the comparison. "I spent a lot of time studying their historical data, looking for patterns others might have missed." Victoria leaned back in her chair, studying me with new interest. "Most junior consultants focus on impressing rather than understanding. What made you take a different approach?" I considered her question carefully. "I learn more from watching and listening than from trying to prove myself. My mother always said that wisdom comes from paying attention to what others overlook." Something shifted in her expression, a flicker of recognition, perhaps even respect. For just a moment, she wasn't looking at me as Daniel Martinez, the 24-year-old MBA graduate who'd been with the firm for 8 months. She was looking at me as someone worth knowing. "That's remarkably mature insight," she said softly, and I caught a note in her voice I'd never heard before. Not the professional tone she used in meetings, but something more personal, more real. The moment stretched between us, charged with an awareness I couldn't quite name. Then her assistant's voice came through the intercom, reminding her of her next appointment, and the spell was broken. "We'll schedule a follow-up to discuss your career trajectory," Victoria said. "Back to business." But as I stood to leave, she added, "Keep doing what you're doing, Daniel. It's working." Walking back to my cubicle, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had just shifted between us. 2 weeks later, I was still at my desk at nearly 10 p.m., the fluorescent lights humming in the empty office. The Henderson Industries analysis was due first thing Monday morning, and I'd lost myself in the numbers, finding patterns in their quarterly reports that told a story of inefficiency, masked by creative accounting. I heard the elevator ding and the soft click of heels on marble. Victoria appeared in the doorway of the main workspace, clearly surprised to find anyone still there. "Daniel." She walked over to my cubicle, concern creasing her brow. "You don't have to prove yourself by working 14-hour days." I looked up from my laptop, rubbing my tired eyes. "I'm not trying to prove anything. This is actually fascinating. Henderson's been hemorrhaging money for 3 years, but their reported profits keep climbing. Someone's been very creative with their categorizations." Victoria pulled up Sarah's vacant chair and sat down beside me. "Show me." For the next hour, I walked her through the analysis, explaining how I'd tracked discrepancies across multiple reporting periods. She asked sharp questions, challenged my assumptions, and offered insights that refined my conclusions. Her perfume something subtle and sophisticated, mixed with the late night quiet of the office to create an intimacy I'd never experienced with a colleague. "You know," Victoria said as we wrapped up the technical discussion, "when I was starting out, I used to stay late like this too. Not because I had to, but because I was the only woman on my team, and I felt like I had to work twice as hard to be taken seriously." "Did it work?" I asked, genuinely curious about her journey. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Eventually, but the cost was higher than I expected. I forgot how to have a life outside these walls." She gestured around the empty office. "Some nights I'd be the last one here, and I'd wonder if success was supposed to feel so... lonely." Her vulnerability caught me off guard. This was Victoria Chen, opening up to me not the polished senior partner, but the woman who'd fought her way to the top and paid a price for it. "Loneliness isn't the cost of success," I said carefully. "It's the cost of not finding people who Understand what drives you. Victoria turned to look at me fully, and in the soft glow of my desk lamp, I saw something flicker across her face, surprise, maybe even a hint of hope. How did you get so wise? She asked quietly. Lost my dad when I was 16. It teaches you to pay attention to what really matters. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, and I realized that somewhere in the conversation, we'd crossed a line from professional mentorship to something more personal. When Victoria finally glanced at her watch, her eyes widened. It's almost midnight. We've been talking for 2 hours. Hadn't noticed. Time had slipped away while we'd connected on a level that had nothing to do with spreadsheets or client presentations. As she gathered her purse to leave, Victoria paused at my cubicle. Thank you for this conversation, Daniel. Needed it more than you know. Watching her walk toward the elevator, I wondered if she felt the same shift I did. Like we'd moved from being colleagues to being two people who actually saw each other. Saturday morning at Grind Coffee, my usual corner table. Claimed with a cup of their dark roast and a biography of Warren Buffett, I came here to escape my cramped studio apartment and think without the corporate atmosphere weighing on my shoulders. The bell above the door chimed, and I looked up to see Victoria entering, her usual composure notably absent. She was on her phone, her free hand pressed to her forehead in a gesture of frustration I recognized from difficult client calls. Oh, Richard, I'm not changing my mind about the custody schedule, she said, her voice strained. We agreed on alternating weekends, and I'm sticking to that. She ended the call abruptly and stood in the middle of the coffee shop, looking momentarily lost. I debated whether to approach this was clearly personal, and we barely knew each other outside the office, but something in her expression, a vulnerability I'd glimpsed that night in the office, made the decision for me. Victoria? I stood up, closing my book. Are you okay? She turned, and for a split second, I saw her mask slip completely. Then her professional composure snapped back into place. Daniel, I didn't expect to see you here. This is my regular Saturday spot. I gestured toward my table. You look like you could use some coffee and maybe a friendly face. Want to sit? I watched her internal debate play out across her features. Professional distance warred with what looked like genuine need for human connection. Finally, she nodded. That would be nice, actually. I got her a lavender latte. She seemed like someone who'd appreciate something refined but not overly sweet, tanned, settled. Back into my chair across from her ex-husband, I asked gently. Victoria sighed, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. He has this way of making me feel like every choice I make is wrong. The divorce, my career focus, even where I choose to live. I spend so much time defending decisions I know are right that sometimes I wonder if I'm actually going crazy. Her honesty surprised me. In the office, Victoria was unshakable. Here she was just a woman dealing with the aftermath of a relationship that had clearly left wounds. Sometimes the right choice feels lonely until you find the right person to share it with, I said. The words coming from some deep well of understanding I didn't know I possessed. Victoria looked at me sharply, as if seeing me for the first time. How old are you, Daniel? 24? She shook her head slowly. You have insights that men twice your age haven't figured out. Maybe age isn't the best measure of understanding people. We talked for another 30 minutes about everything. Except workbooks, travel, the way city life could make you feel simultaneously connected and isolated. When Victoria finally stood to leave, she paused beside my chair. Thank you for this. I forgot how good it feels to have a real conversation. As I watched her walk away, I realized I'd just seen another side of Victoria Chen, not the boss, not the senior partner, but the woman. And I found myself wanting to know more. Monday morning brought an email that changed everything, Daniel. Please see me in my office at 10 a.m. regarding the Peterson Group project. Victoria, the Peterson Group was the firm's most prestigious client. Fortune 500 company whose account was worth more than my annual salary times 10. Their projects were typically handled by senior consultants and partners, not junior analysts. With less than a year of experience, Sarah practically bounced in her chair when I told her. The Peterson Group? Daniel, that's huge. But ... She frowned, pulling up Victoria's project history on her computer. She usually only picks people with 5+ years of experience for her elite teams. The last junior consultant she selected was promoted to senior within 6 months. I tried to ignore the flutter of anticipation in my chest. Maybe she just needs someone with fresh analytical skills. Or maybe she sees something in you that others don't, Sarah said with a knowing smile. In Victoria's office an hour later, I listened as she outlined the scope of the project to comprehensive. Organizational restructuring that would touch every aspect of Peterson's operations. This is a career-defining project, Victoria explained, her hands gesturing precisely as she spoke. The client presentation is in 6 weeks, and failure isn't an option. I'm assembling a team of our best people. She paused, looking directly at me. I want you as my lead analyst. I'm honored, I said, meaning it. But can I ask why you chose me? Victoria's expression softened slightly. Because you see patterns others miss. Because you ask the right questions instead of trying to impress with the wrong answers, and because... She hesitated, then continued. Because I think you're ready for challenges that others your age wouldn't be. At the first team meeting, 5 senior consultants and 1 junior analyst sat around Victoria's conference table. I felt the weight of their collective experience, but also sensed Victoria's confidence in my abilities. Daniel will be handling the primary data analysis, Victoria announced, ignoring the surprised glances exchanged around the table. His insights will form the foundation of our recommendations. As the meeting progressed, I found myself naturally falling into sync with Victoria's thinking. When she outlined a hypothesis, I was already pulling up the data to test it. I identified anomalies in Peterson's financial patterns. She immediately grasped the implications. Marcus Chen, a senior consultant, leaned over during a break. I've never seen Victoria collaborate so seamlessly with someone, he murmured. To think alike. Walking back to my desk after the meeting, I couldn't shake the feeling that Victoria had done more than just assign me to a project. She'd opened a door to something bigger, professionally and personally. The question was whether I was ready to walk through it. The Peterson Group presentation was scheduled for Thursday morning in Chicago, which meant Victoria and I would be traveling together Tuesday evening. As our plane lifted off from LaGuardia, I tried to focus on the presentation materials spread across my laptop screen, but I kept stealing glances at Victoria in the seat beside me. She'd loosened her usual professional armor slightly for travel. Her blazer hung in the overhead compartment, leaving her in a cream silk blouse that somehow made her seem more approachable. Even at 30,000 feet, she commanded attention from the flight attendants, who seemed eager to ensure her comfort. Nervous about tomorrow? She asked, closing her own laptop as we reached cruising altitude. Excited, I said honestly. It feels like the kind of presentation that changes careers. Victoria smiled, and I caught something warm in her expression. I had the same feeling about my first major client presentation. I was 28, trying to convince a room full of executives twice my age that they should trust a woman barely. Out of business school? Did you pull it off? Better than that, I landed the biggest account the firm had seen in 5 years. She paused, looking out the window at the clouds below. But success in consulting can be isolating. The higher you climb, the fewer people understand the pressure, the constant need to prove yourself. That evening, we found ourselves at the hotel restaurant, a quiet place with dim lighting and an intimate atmosphere that made our conversation feel more personal than professional. Victoria had changed into a navy dress that accentuated her elegant neckline, and I'd traded my suit for dark jeans and a button-down shirt. You know what I realized about leadership? I said, cutting into my steak as our conversation meandered. From client strategy to broader business philosophy, the best leaders I've observed aren't the ones who have all the answers. They're the ones brave enough to admit when they don't. Victoria set down her wine glass, studying me intently. A dangerous philosophy in consulting. Clients pay us to be experts. But authentic leadership comes from vulnerability, doesn't it? When someone admits they don't know everything but they're committed to figuring it out, it makes people want to follow them. Something shifted in Victoria's expression of recognition. Perhaps even relief. I spend so much energy being on all the time. The composed senior partner who never doubts herself, never shows weakness. Sometimes I wonder if I've forgotten how to just be human. You're human right now, I said softly. This conversation, your honesty, that's the real Victoria. And she's pretty remarkable. We walked back through the hotel lobby in comfortable silence, the space between us charged with an awareness neither of us was ready to name. In the elevator, I pressed the button for our respective floors, mine on the 15th, hers on the 20th. As we rose through the building, I noticed how Victoria stood closer to me than strictly necessary, how she seemed to be memorizing the way I held the door for her when we'd left the restaurant. "Thank you for dinner," she said as the elevator stopped at my floor, "and for the conversation. I needed to remember what it feels like to talk to someone who sees me as more than just a title." Our eyes met in the mirrored elevator doors, and, for a heartbeat, neither of us moved. Then the door started to close, and I stepped out, leaving her to continue up to her floor. That night, lying in the unfamiliar hotel bed, I stared at the ceiling and replayed every moment of our evening, together, 3 floors above me. I wondered if Victoria was doing the same thing, thinking about the way our knees had almost touched under the restaurant table. The sound of her laugh when I'd told a story about my college roommate, the brief moment. In the elevator, when something unspoken had passed between us, the presentation the next morning went flawlessly. Victoria and I moved through our sections with the kind of seamless collaboration that made the Peterson executives nod approvingly. But beneath the professional success, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted between us. The night before, 2 weeks after Chicago, the firm was in crisis mode. Henderson Industries, one of our oldest clients, was threatening to terminate their contract over a strategic recommendation that had backfired spectacularly. The partners were in emergency meetings, and tension crackled through the office. Like electricity before a storm, I watched Victoria handle the crisis with her usual poise, moving from conference room to conference room, her voice steady as she coordinated damage control with military precision. But I'd learned to read the subtle signs of her stress, the way she held her shoulders slightly too high, the careful control in her movements that suggested she was holding herself together through sheer will. During a brief break between crisis meetings, I noticed her hands shaking as she reached for her coffee cup. It was such a small thing, barely perceptible, but it told me everything I needed to know about the pressure she was carrying. I slipped away from my desk and returned with a cup of chamomile tea from the executive break room, knocking softly on her office door. "Victoria, can I come in?" She looked up from the stack of legal documents she was reviewing, her professional mask firmly in place. "Of course. Do you have the Henderson analysis ready?" I set the tea on her desk and closed the door behind me. "The analysis is done, but that's not why I'm here. Do you want to talk about what's really going on?" For a moment, Victoria's composure wavered. She glanced at the closed door, then back at me, and I saw her internal struggle, the leader who couldn't afford to show weakness warring with the woman who desperately needed someone to see her struggle. "The partners are questioning my judgment," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Henderson was my client, my recommendation. They walk, it's not just a hit to our revenue, it's a direct reflection on my capabilities as a senior partner." She pressed her palms flat against the desk, and I noticed the slight tremor in her fingers that she was trying to control. "Sometimes I feel like I'm failing at everything that matters," she continued, the words coming out in a rush. "Like I'm just pretending to be competent and everyone's about to figure out that I don't actually know what I'm doing." I moved closer to her desk, resisting the urge to reach out and cover her shaking hands with mine. "Victoria, you're not failing. You're human. There's a difference." She looked up at me with eyes that were bright with unshed tears. "How can you be so sure? 'Cause I've watched you work. I've seen how you care about your clients, how you fight for your team, how you push yourself to be better every single day. That's not failure, that's dedication. And the fact that you care enough to question yourself, that's what makes you a great leader." For a moment we stayed frozen in that space, me standing beside her desk, her looking up at me with an expression of vulnerability I'd never seen before. My hand moved instinctively toward hers, and I saw her eyes flicker down to watch the movement. We both realized how close we were to crossing a line, and we both pulled back at the same time. But the awareness between us was undeniable now. In that moment of near touch, something had crystallized, the understanding that what we felt for each other went far beyond professional respect or friendly mentorship. "Thank you," Victoria said softly, her voice steadier now. "I've never had someone who could see both my strength and my struggles without trying to fix me or dismiss me." As I left her office, I knew we'd crossed into territory that neither of us had planned to explore. The question was what we were going to do about it. "Did you know Victoria has never dated anyone from the office?" Sarah said during our lunch. Break the following week. It's unwrapping her salad with the enthusiasm of someone sharing particularly juicy gossip. I looked up from my sandwich, trying to keep my expression neutral. "How would you know that?" Rebecca from HR mentioned it when I was asking about the company policy on workplace relationships. Sarah blushed slightly. "Not for any particular reason, just curiosity." Anyway, apparently Victoria's had a strict policy about keeping work and personal life separate ever since her divorce. My chest tightened with an uncomfortable mixture of disappointment and understanding. Does that make sense, given her position? Rebecca also said someone in accounting thinks Victoria believes younger guys are too immature for serious relationships. Something about how she mentioned once that men her age still act like they're in college. Sarah took a bite of lettuce, completely oblivious to the way her words hit me like a physical blow. I spent the rest of the afternoon wondering if I'd been misreading every signal. Every meaningful glance, every moment of connection Victoria and I had shared. Maybe what felt like growing attraction to me was simply a senior partner being kind to a promising junior consultant. The opportunity for clarity came later that week when Victoria and I were reviewing the final Peterson Group reports in her office. The work was nearly done, which meant our excuse for these private meetings was coming to an end. "You've grown so much since Chicago," Victoria said, reviewing my analysis with genuine admiration. "Your insights have shaped this entire project. You have an old soul, Daniel. Sometimes I forget how young you are." There it was, the reminder of our age difference, casual but pointed. I decided to address it head-on. "Does age really define maturity?" I asked, setting down my pen and looking directly at her. "I've met 50-year-olds who act like teenagers. I've known people younger than me who've been through enough to understand what really matters." In life, Victoria's expression grew guarded. Experience shapes perspective, though. There's something to be said for living through different phases of life. Like what? She hesitated, then seemed to choose her words carefully. Like understanding the weight of real consequences, career setbacks, divorce, the pressure of leadership. It changes how you approach relationships, how much risk you're willing to take. I could feel her pulling back, using age as a barrier to whatever was growing between us. "So you think someone younger couldn't understand those things? Couldn't be worth the risk?" "I think," Victoria said slowly, "that timing matters. And circumstances matter. And sometimes what feels right in the moment isn't sustainable in the long term." Her deflection told me everything I needed to know. She felt what I felt, but she was talking herself out of it before it could develop into something that might challenge her carefully controlled world. But her words also planted seeds of doubt about her assumptions. I could see it in the way she avoided my eyes, the careful distance she put between us as we finished our work. For the first time, Victoria was questioning whether age was really the insurmountable barrier. She'd convinced herself it was. The firm's annual holiday party was held at the Metropolitan Club, a venue that matched Victoria's understated elegance perfectly. I watched her work the room in a black cocktail dress that was simultaneously professional and stunning. Her hair swept up to reveal the graceful line of her neck. She moved through conversations with board members, clients, and partners, with the kind of social grace that made it look effortless. But I learned to read the subtle signs of her discomfort, the way she held her champagne glass a little too tightly, the almost imperceptible tension in her smile when someone made a comment about her being too young to be a senior partner. During a lull in the networking, I found her on the club's balcony, looking out over the city lights with an expression of quiet exhaustion. "Hiding from the crowd?" I asked. Joining her at the railing, she turned with a genuine smile, the first relaxed expression I'd seen from her all evening, taking a moment to breathe. "These events are performative marathons. You handled them beautifully. I watched you redirect that conversation with Morrison when he started getting inappropriate about your age. Victoria laughed softly. Years of practice. Though I have to admit, it's easier when I know someone in the room actually sees me for who I am, rather than what they expect me to be. The city spread out below us, twinkling with holiday lights and the movement of late evening traffic. In the soft glow from the club's windows, Victoria looked younger, more vulnerable than her usual polished professional self. "Thank you for being someone I can trust," she said quietly. "These past few months having you to really talk to has meant more than you know." The words hung between us, loaded with meaning neither of us was quite ready to acknowledge. I felt the confession building in my chest, the need to tell her that she'd become so much more than a mentor or colleague to me. "Victoria, you're going to make some woman very happy someday," she interrupted, her voice carrying a note of wistfulness that made my heart ache. I turned to face her fully, studying her profile in the soft light. "Maybe the woman I want doesn't think she's available." The words came out before I could stop them, carrying all the weight of my feelings for her. Victoria went very still, and I saw her breath catch. When she turned to look at me, there was something raw and uncertain in her expression. "Daniel, ... The balcony door opened behind us, and Sarah's voice cut through the moment like a blade. "There you are. Victoria, they're about to do the partner recognition ceremony. They need you inside." The spell was broken. Victoria straightened, her professional composure sliding back into place like armor. But as we walked back into the party, I caught her glancing at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, part fear, part longing, and something that might have been hope. The week after the holiday party, something shifted in Victoria's demeanor toward me. The warm acknowledgments in the hallway became polite nods. Our coffee conversations disappeared entirely. When I tried to catch her eye during the Monday morning partner meeting, she looked straight through me, as if I were invisible. I replayed our balcony conversation obsessively, wondering if I'd crossed a line with my comment about wanting someone. Who doesn't think she's available? Maybe I'd been too direct, too presumptuous. Maybe she was pulling back to protect both our careers. The answer came Wednesday afternoon when I was returning from lunch and overheard a conversation in the break room. Two senior associates were discussing office dynamics with the casual cruelty that comes from too much caffeine and too little empathy. "Have you noticed how close Martinez has gotten to Victoria?" James from corporate law was saying as he stirred sugar into his coffee. "Kid's only been here 8 months, and suddenly he's on her elite project team." "Smart strategy," replied Lisa from M&A. "There's nothing wrong with playing the game, especially with someone as influential as Victoria. Though, I have to say it's pretty calculating for someone who seems so earnest." "Think there's something romantic going on?" James asked with the tone of someone enjoying a particularly juicy piece of gossip. Lisa laughed. "Please. Victoria's way too smart to fall for that. She knows ambitious young consultants will do anything to get ahead. Daniel's probably just figured out that flattering the senior partner is faster than actually earning his stripes." I stood frozen in the hallway, their words hitting me like physical blows. They were reducing everything Victoria and I had shared, every meaningful conversation, every moment of genuine connection, to career opportunism. And if they were saying this, what must Victoria be thinking? When I finally worked up the courage to approach her office later that day, I couldn't tell Sarah about the holiday party conversation, about the feelings I'd almost confessed, about the way Victoria had looked at me before her professional mask slammed back into place. Instead, I just shook my head and changed the subject. But the emotional distance was becoming unbearable. Every professional interaction felt forced. Every meeting was conducted with painful formality. I watched Victoria retreat behind her senior partner persona. I felt like I was losing not just the woman I'd grown to care about, but also the friend who had seen and understood me in ways no one else ever had. By the following Monday, I couldn't stand the uncertainty anymore. I sent Victoria an email requesting a private meeting, not about the Peterson project, not about client work, but about a personal matter that requires clarification. She made me wait until the end of the day, and when I finally sat across, From her in the familiar setting of her corner office, the woman I faced bore little resemblance to the person who had opened up to me in Chicago or shared her vulnerabilities during the Henderson crisis. "What did you want to discuss?" Victoria asked, her voice professionally cordial but completely devoid of the warmth I'd grown accustomed to. I took a breath, knowing this conversation would either repair what we'd built or destroy it completely. "I want to address whatever's changed between us. 3 weeks ago, we were collaborating easily, talking openly. Now, you can barely look at me. What happened?" Victoria's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I think we've gotten too comfortable. Daniel, you're my employee. I'm your supervisor. Perhaps we lost sight of appropriate professional boundaries." Her words felt rehearsed, like she'd been practicing this conversation, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the careful control that suggested this distance was costing her, as much as it was costing me. "Is that all I am to you?" I asked quietly. "Your employee? 'Cause you're much more to me than just my boss." Something flickered across Victoria's face, surprise, maybe even relief that I was finally addressing the elephant in the room. But then her defenses snapped back into place. "Daniel, stop." She stood up from her desk, putting physical distance between us. "You're too young for me. This whole situation is complicated in ways you don't understand." "You're right," I said. "Standing as well, I am young. But I'm old enough to know what I want. I'm old enough to know when someone is worth fighting for." Victoria went very still, her back to me as she stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city below. She spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Oh. You don't know what you're asking. I'm not asking for anything except honesty. What's been happening between us these past few months? It's about why you've been avoiding me since the holiday party, about whether I imagined every meaningful conversation we've had." She turned to face me then, and I saw the war playing out in her expression, professional caution, battling with something deeper and more vulnerable. "The partners notice everything, Daniel. Office relationships are career suicide, especially for women in leadership positions, and the age difference." She shook her head. "People are already talking about your rapid advancement, suggesting that my mentorship isn't entirely professional." So she had heard the gossip. Pieces fell into place, her sudden coldness, the professional distance, the way she'd been, avoiding any situation where we might be alone together. "So you think I've been using you?" I asked, unable to keep the hurt out of my voice. "You think everything between us has been calculated career advancement?" "I think," Victoria said carefully, "that you're ambitious and intelligent, and that the line between genuine connection and professional strategy isn't always clear." Her words stung because they revealed how little she understood my motivations, how completely she'd misread my character, but they also gave me clarity about what I needed to fight for. "You're wrong," I said simply, "and I'm going to prove it to you." Victoria returned to her chair, looking suddenly exhausted. "Daniel, please don't make this harder than it already is. I'm not trying to make it hard. I'm trying to make it honest." I sat back down across from her, leaning forward with my hands clasped. "Can I tell you what I see when I look at you?" She nodded reluctantly. "I see Victorinox, the senior partner, not my boss, not some career opportunity. I see the woman who stays late because she genuinely cares about her client's success, who brought me tea when I was working too hard because she noticed I was pushing myself, who shared her fears about feeling isolated in leadership because she trusted me enough to be vulnerable." Victoria's professional mask was starting to slip, and I could see the woman I'd grown to care about beneath it. I see someone brilliant and strong and kind who's been hurt before and is scared to risk being hurt again. And I see someone who feels the same connection I do, but is talking herself out of it, because it doesn't fit into the neat categories she's created for her life. "The career implications alone," Victoria began, "are real," I finished. "I'm not dismissing them. The age difference is real too. So is the power dynamic. So is the office gossip and the potential for complications. But you know what else is real? The way we talk to each other. The way you laugh at my terrible jokes. The way I can tell when you're stressed before anyone else notices. The way we think together, like we're two parts of the same mind." Victoria was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands folded on the desk. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than it had been in weeks. My divorce taught me not to trust my judgment about men. Richard was charming and successful and said all the right things, but ultimately he was more interested in the idea of being married to a successful woman than in actually being married to me. She looked up at me with eyes that held years of accumulated hurt. How do I know this isn't the same thing? How do I know you're not attracted to the idea of being with your boss rather than to who I actually am? Because I said gently, I fell for the woman who admitted she felt like she was failing. I fell for the person who forgot to eat lunch when she was worried about her team. I fell for Victoria at her most human, not Victoria at her most powerful. Something shifted in her expression, a crack in the wall she'd built around herself. I'm not him, I continued. And this isn't that. What we have doesn't feel calculated or strategic to me. It feels like coming home. Victoria's breath caught, and I saw her fighting back tears. I have feelings for you too, she whispered. I've been trying to ignore them, to rationalize them away, but they won't disappear, and that terrifies me. Why? Because if I'm wrong about this, about why lose everything I've worked for? My reputation, my career, my sense of myself as someone who makes smart decisions? She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. I can't afford to be wrong about something this important. I reached across the desk and covered her hand with mine. This time she didn't pull away. What if you're not wrong? I asked. What if this is the smartest decision you've ever made? Victoria looked down at our joined hands, then back up at my face. What are you proposing? Is that we be honest about what's happening between us? That we figure out the logistics as we go, but that we don't let fear make the decision for us. I squeezed her hand gently. That we see where this goes. For the first time in weeks, Victoria smiled, not the professional expression she wore in meetings, but the genuine warmth I remembered from our Chicago dinner. This is going to be complicated, she said. The first few weeks after our honest conversation in Victoria's office felt like learning. To breathe in a new way? We'd agreed to explore our connection privately, which meant maintaining perfect professionalism. During work hours, while allowing ourselves to be authentic after 5 p.m., our first real date happened 3 days later. Victoria suggested a small Italian restaurant 20 minutes outside the city, somewhere we won't run into anyone from the firm. She said with a smile that was both nervous and excited. I arrived first, choosing a corner table that offered privacy, and watched her walk through the entrance in a simple black dress that somehow made her more beautiful than any of her perfectly tailored work suits. This feels different, she said. As we settled into our seats, and I knew exactly what she meant. Without the undercurrent of uncertainty that had marked all our previous conversations, we could finally just be ourselves, Daniel and Victoria, not junior consultant and senior partner. The conversation flowed for 3 hours. We talked about everything except work, her photography hobby that she'd abandoned after her divorce, my dream of eventually teaching business strategy at a university, the books that had shaped us, the places we wanted to travel. When the restaurant began closing around us, neither of us wanted the evening to end. Would you like to see my apartment? I asked as we walked to our cars. It's nothing fancy, but I make a decent cup of coffee. Victoria's penthouse had been intimidating in its perfection, all clean lines and expensive furniture that looked like it belonged in a magazine. My studio apartment was the opposite. Cozy, lived in, filled with books and the kind of personal touches that made a space feel like home. This is very you, Victoria said, running her fingers along the spines of my bookshelf while I started the coffee maker. Thoughtful, warm, real. We sat on my small couch, talking until nearly midnight about dreams that went beyond career ambitions. Victoria told me about her childhood plan to be a photographer, traveling the world to capture moments of genuine human connection. I shared my vision of a life that balanced professional success with meaningful relationships and the kind of simple pleasures that made ordinary days extraordinary. I forgot that life could feel this easy, Victoria said as I walked her to her car. Thank you for reminding me. The relationship felt natural, right? Despite all the external complications we knew we'd have to navigate, 2 months of careful dating transformed both of us in ways I hadn't expected. Victoria began to relax in ways that went beyond our private moments together. I noticed her laughing more freely in team meetings, taking longer lunch breaks, even leaving the office at reasonable hours instead of working until 9 or 10 every night. "You're different," Sarah commented one Tuesday afternoon, studying Victoria as she walked past our cubicles. "Happier, I think. Less... intense." I had to hide my smile, knowing I was at least partially responsible for the change Sarah had noticed. Our weekends became small adventures. I introduced Victoria to the farmer's market downtown, where she discovered a passion for selecting fresh flowers and exotic vegetables she'd never cooked with before. She taught me to appreciate classical music, taking me to symphony performances, where I watched her face transform with the music, seeing a side of her that was purely emotional and unguarded. "I haven't felt this playful in years," she told me one Saturday afternoon as we browsed through a used bookstore. Our fingers intertwined as we wandered through the poetry section. "Oh, you make me remember who I used to be before I became so focused on proving myself." The age difference that had seemed so significant in Victoria's mind became irrelevant in the face of our compatibility. We thought similarly, shared the same values, and challenged each other intellectually in ways that made both of us better. Victoria became more open to spontaneity and simple pleasures, while I grew more confident and focused. Inspired by her dedication and drive, by month 3, our happiness had become noticeable enough to attract attention. Sarah cornered me after a team meeting, her expression concerned and curious. "Okay, what's going on with you?" she asked, pulling me aside in the break room. "You've been practically glowing for weeks. And don't think I haven't noticed the way you check your phone and smile. Are you seeing someone?" I deflected as best I could. But lying to Sarah felt wrong in ways that hiding our relationship for professional reasons didn't. The secret was starting to weigh on me, especially when she'd talk about Victoria with such admiration, completely unaware that the woman she respected professionally was also the person making me happier than I'd ever been. The close call came. On a Thursday evening when Victoria and I were having dinner at what we'd thought was a safely distant restaurant, Chen from the firm walked in with a client, and we both froze, watching as his eyes swept the room before settling on our table. Victoria's hand was halfway to mine across the table, and we both pulled back simultaneously. "Victoria." Marcus approached with a broad smile. "What a coincidence. Client dinner." "Something like that," Victoria replied smoothly, her professional composure snapping into place. We were discussing the Patterson account. After Marcus left, we sat in uncomfortable silence for several minutes. "This isn't sustainable long term." "Is it?" Victoria asked quietly. "The constant vigilance, the careful planning, the lies by omission to people we care about?" "What are you saying?" I asked, though I could see the worry building in her expression. "I'm saying we need to figure out how to make this work in the real world, not just in secret." The conversation about our future happened the following weekend. In my apartment, both of us finally ready to address the elephant in the room. "I've been thinking about requesting a transfer," Victoria said, curled up beside me on the couch. "If you were working under a different partner, the policy complications would be minimized." I sat up, turning to face her fully. "Victoria, no. I won't let you sacrifice your career for us. You've worked too hard to get where you are to step back now. It wouldn't be stepping back, just stepping sideways. It would be—" I interrupted. "Gently, and we both know it. Besides, what message would that send? That our relationship is something to hide from, something that requires damage control." Victoria was quiet for a long moment, processing my words. "Then what do you suggest?" "I suggest we stop hiding and start planning. I'm up for promotion to senior consultant in 6 months. If I get it tanned, I will, based on my work, not our relationship then. The power dynamic becomes less of an issue." I took her hands in mine. "We continue being professional at work. We document everything to show that my advancement is merit-based. And we start having quiet conversations with HR about the firm's policies." "You want to go public?" Victoria asked, and I could hear both hope and fear in her voice. "I want to build a real life with you. Not a secret. Not something we have to hide from our friends and colleagues, but an actual relationship that can grow and develop naturally." Victoria studied my face for a long moment, then smiled the genuine, unreserved smile I'd come to love. "You really are old enough to know what you want, aren't you? I told you that months ago," I said, leaning in to kiss her. "I'm also patient enough to wait until the timing is right, and smart enough to know when something is worth fighting for." "This is going to require careful planning," Victoria said, but her tone was determined rather than worried. "The best things usually do." The promotion came through on a Thursday morning in March. Senior consultant, effective immediately, with a substantial raise and my own office on the 32nd floor. More importantly, it came with official recognition that my advancement was based on exceptional analytical skills and client results, exactly the paper trail Victoria and I had been building. "Congratulations," Victoria said during our team meeting that afternoon, her professional pride genuine and well documented. "Your work on the Morrison and Patterson accounts made this promotion inevitable." That evening, in the privacy of Victoria's penthouse, which had gradually become warmer and more lived in over the months, we'd been together, we celebrated with champagne and the kind of quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing you've earned something important. "So," Victoria said, as we sat on her balcony overlooking the city lights, ready for the next phase, "we'd already had preliminary conversations with HR about the firm's relationship policies. Victoria had discreetly consulted with the managing partners about potential conflicts of interest. The general consensus was that relationships between colleagues of equal standing were manageable with proper disclosure and professional boundaries." "More than ready," I said, taking her hand openly without the careful vigilance that had marked our first months together. "I'm tired of pretending that the best thing in my life doesn't exist." Victoria had grown more confident in her personal choices over the past 8 months. The woman who'd once been terrified of trusting her judgment about men had learned to trust herself again. She'd also learned to balance her professional drive with personal happiness, leaving work at reasonable hours, taking actual vacations, allowing herself to be vulnerable without seeing it as weakness. "I love you," she said simply, words that still had the power to make my heart race even though we'd been saying them to each other for months. "And I love the life we're building together." The official announcement came 2 weeks later, simple. Email to the partners and senior staff noting that Victoria, Chen, and Daniel Martinez were in a personal relationship, and that all necessary disclosures had been made to HR. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with several colleagues commenting that they'd suspected something and were happy to see us both so clearly thriving. Sarah's reaction was the most entertaining. "I knew something was different about you both," she exclaimed, practically bouncing in her excitement. "You've been so happy, and Victoria's been so much more relaxed. This is perfect." The transition from secret relationship to public couple was surprisingly smooth. We'd already learned to maintain professional boundaries during work hours, and our colleagues respected our ability to separate personal and professional interactions. If anything, the firm seemed proud to have such a clear example of how workplace relationships could be handled with maturity and integrity. 6 months later, we started looking at apartments together, something larger than my studio but warmer than Victoria's penthouse. We found a place in Brooklyn with good light for Victoria's renewed photography hobby and space for the home office where I planned to work on the business strategy book I'd started writing. "You know what I realized?" Victoria said one evening, as we painted the walls of our new bedroom. The age difference that seemed so significant at the beginning. It was never really about age at all. What was it about? Fear. Fear of being vulnerable again. Fear of trusting my judgment. Fear of letting someone see me as human rather than just successful. She set down her brush and turned to face me. "You didn't just prove you were mature enough for this relationship. You helped me become brave enough for it." Looking back now, I understand that what Victoria and I built together wasn't just a relationship. It was a partnership based on genuine respect, its intellectual compatibility, and the kind of emotional courage that allows people to be completely authentic with each other. The challenges we'd anticipated office gossip, career complications, questions about our age difference turned out to be far less significant than the rewards. We'd created something that made both of us better. Victoria more open and trusting, me more confident and focused. Our love story didn't follow conventional timelines or traditional expectations, but it was ours. Built slowly through late night conversations and shared vulnerabilities, tested by professional pressures and social assumptions, and ultimately strengthened by our willingness to fight for something real in a world that often prioritizes appearance over authenticity. Do you ever regret taking the risk? Victoria asked me recently as we sat in our favorite coffee shop, the same one where she'd first opened up to me about feeling constantly defensive about her choices. I considered the question seriously, thinking about everything we'd navigated together, the secrecy, the professional complications, the social expectations we'd had to overcome. Then I looked at the woman across from me, brilliant, strong, kind, and completely herself in a way she'd never been able to be with anyone else. Never, I said, reaching across the table to take her hand. Sometimes knowing what you want is more important than fitting into what others expect. And sometimes the best relationships are the ones that challenge everything you thought you knew about love, timing, and what's possible when two people really see each other. Victoria smiled, squeezing my hand. Here's to being old enough to know what we want, and brave enough to go after it.